morning, future CPAs. We are the Group 4 and we're here to discuss the lesson about share-based payments. Our discussion on share-based payments is subdivided into the following chapters. Chapter 12, Share-based payments Part 1, and Chapter 13, Share-based payments Part 2. The learning objectives on this Part 1 is to define a share-based payment transaction, to state the accounting methods applicable to share-based payment transaction with non-employees and employees, and the account for share-based compensation plans. So what is a share-based payment transactions? It is a transaction in which the entity acquires goods or services and pays for them by issuing its own equity instruments or cash based on the value of its own equity instruments. So ang share-based payment transaction, it is a payment for goods or services. So a company may decide to purchase goods or to decide to pay an employee in either shares, share options, with some value to the employee or value to our supplier of the goods, and cash payment based on the share price. So a share-based payment transaction can be equity settled. Pagka equity settled, there is a payment in shares or share options. Kapag naman cash settled, it is based on the share price. And lastly, it is a choice between equity settled and cash settled. So what is an equity instrument? It is a document that acts as a legal evidence or proof of ownership rights, like share certificates in a company or business firm. Under the PFRS 2, the share-based payment transaction may apply to all entities, including subsidiaries and using their parents or fellow subsidiaries' equity instruments as consideration for goods or services, except the following. First, the transactions with owners acting in their capacity owners, business combinations, and issuance of shares as settlement of forward contracts, futures, and other derivative instruments. Paano nga ba nare-recognize ang isang share-based payment transactions? So sabi natin kanina, pwede siyang ma-receive in an equity-settled share-based payment transaction or liability if the goods or services are acquired in a cash-settled share-based payment transaction. So ano nga ba ang equity-settled share-based payment transactions? Ito yung the employees and directors would normally be expensed and would be based on their fair value at the grant date. Yun yung date at which the entity and other party ay nag-agree sa isang share-based transaction. Ang fair value should be based on market price wherever this is possible. Many shares and share options will not be traded on an active market. Kung yun yung case, then valuation techniques such as the option pricing model would be used. So an equity-settled share-based payment transactions is also referred to share options. Tandaan natin na pagka sinabing share options, it could be a return for the service provided. The order of measurement for the non-employees is first, fair value of goods or services received. Second is fair value of equity instruments granted. While in the employees and others providing similar services, the order of priority in measurement is the fair value of equity instruments granted and the intrinsic value. Yung mga employees and others providing similar services, sila yung mga nag-render ng personal services nila sa isang entity. It may be individuals regarded as employees for legal or tax purposes. Individuals work for the entity under its direction in the same way as individuals who are regarded as employees for legal or tax purposes, or the services rendered are similar to those rendered by employees. The fair value is measured at the measurement date. For the non-employees, ang measurement date nila is when the entity receives the goods or services, while the employees, ang measurement date is the grant date. Ano nga ba yung grant date? Grant date, it is a date on which a share option or other equity-based award is granted to the recipient. The grant date is considered to be the date on which the employer and an employee agreed upon the most essential terms and conditions associated with the award. So yung grant date, it is also the date the shares are typically valued. So this value often determines your exercise price. Ano naman yung intrinsic value? Intrinsic value, it is the difference between the fair value of the shares which the counterparty has the right to subscribe or receive band the subscription price that the counterparty is required to pay. Ito yung price of a rational investor na willing magbayad for an investment given na meron tong malaking risk. And paano nga ba computein ang intrinsic value? Intrinsic value can be computed as equals to the market value of shares minus option price. Share-based compensation plans, or also called as stock-based compensation. It is an arrangement whereby in exchange for services, an employee is compensated in the form of the entity's equity instrument. So it is a way of paying employees, executives, and directors of a company with equity in the business. It is typically used to motivate employees beyond their regular cash-based compensation and to align their interests with those of the company's shareholders. The shares issued to employees are usually subject to a vesting period before they are earned and can be sold. So how a share-based compensation plans works? So, nagko-compensate yung companies to their employees by issuing them stock options or restricted shares. The shares typically vest over a few years, meaning they are not earned by the employee until a specified period of time has passed. Employee share option plans are also called the employee stock options. It is a type of equity compensation granted by companies to their employees and executives. Rather than granting shares of stocks directly, the company gives derivative options on the stock instead. These options come in the form of regular call options and give the employee the right to buy the company stock at a specified price for a finite period of time. Measurement of the services received are measured using the following order or priority. First is the fair value of equity instruments granted at grant date. So, dito, the compensation is actually equal to the fair value of the share options. Fair value na tinutukoy dito ay yung grant date. Kung magkano yung fair value ng option sa date of grant, yun yung amount na gagamitin mo to measure the share options. Next is the intrinsic value. Intrinsic value, pag gagamitin mo lang to pag hindi available yung value ng share options. So, if the fair value of the options is not available, that is the time that you can use the intrinsic value. Vesting period. It is during which all specified vesting conditions of a share-based payment arrangement are to be satisfied. The share vesting is the process by which an employee, investor, or co-founder is rewarded with shares or stock options but receives the full rights to them over a set period of time, or in some cases, after a specific milestone is hit, usually one that's established in an employment contract or shareholders agreement. Usually, ang vesting period ay umaabot ng 3 to 5 years until the employee is 100% vested. A common vesting period is 3 to 5 years. If the share options granted vest immediately, meaning the employee is entitled to the shares without the need to satisfy any condition, salaries expense is recognized in full with a corresponding increase in equity at grant date. But if the share options granted do not vest until the employee completes a specified period of service, the entity recognizes salaries expense as the employee renders services over the vesting period. In the absence of evidence to the contrary, it is presumed that the share options vest immediately, top of form or bottom of form.
Measurement basis, historical. Ang historical cost ay yung mga tulad ng transaction price, yung changes ng value, hindi na i-recognize unless kung ito ay refer sa impairment, depreciation, at interest accrual. Sa current value, ang current value naman ay nagpo-provide ng updated monetary information na nag-reflect sa conditions at measurements date. At ang current value ay sakop nito ang fair value, value in use, for fulfillment value, at ang current cost. Ito naman sa fair value. Fair value is the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. Ang ibig sabihin dito, ang fair value ay hindi derived from the transaction price at hindi rin ito affected by transaction cost. Value in use for fulfillment values. Itong dalawang to ay naka-refer doon sa present value of the movement ng cash and economic resources for the use of asset o pang-fulfillment ng liability. Di katulad ng fair value. Itong dalawang ito ay entity specific. Sa current cost, the current cost of an asset is an cost of an equivalent asset at the measurement date, comprising the consideration that would be paid at the measurement date that plus the transaction cost that would be incurred at the date. Ang current cost at historical cost ay similar dahil sila ay entry values. Dito sa relevance, characteristic of the asset or liability, and how the asset contribute to the future cash flows. For example, when the asset in question is highly sensitive to market price changes, kung ito ay derivative pa, ang current value ng measurements ay maaaring maging appropriate at hindi historical cost. Faithful representation. Measurement uncertainty, outcome uncertainty, and existence uncertainty. Cash flow-based measurement techniques. Cash flow-based measurement techniques is one way to estimate a certain measurement but is not a measurement basis. Sa madaling salita, ang cash flow measurement techniques ay pwedeng gamitin kahit saan sa tatlong current value measurements. Yun yung historical cost, current value, at current cost.
Cancellation and early settlement. Cancellations and early settlements are accounted for as acceleration of vesting. What do we mean by this? The amount of salaries expense that would otherwise be recognized over the remaining vesting period is simply recognized immediately. Ang mangyayari dito, any payment made to the employee on the cancellation or settlement of the grant is accounted for as a repurchase of an equity interest or as a deduction from equity. Here we have an illustration. On January 1, 20X1, ABC Co. grants 100 share options to each of its 10 sales executives with the condition that the employee remains in ABC's employ for 3 years. On grant date, the fair value of the share option is 15 per share. During 20X1, ABC recognized salaries expense of 5,000 in relation to the share options granted. Here, ABC decided to settle the share options early on December 31, 20X2. No employees have left the company's employ during 20X1 and 20X2. Since ang problem is acceleration vesting, ang fair value of share options at grant date, which is 15,000, ima-minus natin yung salaries expense given, recognized in previous periods, which is 5,000, and now we get salaries expense 2,000 to 10,000. What is the journal entry? Debit salaries expense 10,000 and credit share premium options outstanding 10,000. Isummary natin ang Chapter 12, Share-Based Payments Part 1. First, a share-based payment transaction is either equity settled, cash settled, or provides a choice of settlement between the two. Next, a share-based transaction with a non-employee is measured using the following order of priority. Number 1, fair value of the goods or services received. Number 2, fair value of the equity instrument granted. Next, a share-based payment transaction with an employee or others providing similar services is measured using the following order of priority. Number 1, fair value of the equity instrument granted, and number 2, intrinsic value. Next, the compensation expense on share-based compensation plans are recognized in full at grant date if they vest immediately or over the vesting period if there are vesting conditions. And lastly, cancellations and early settlements are accounted for as acceleration of vesting. The amount of salaries expense that would otherwise be recognized over the remaining vesting period is simply recognized immediately. Yun lang po, and thank you for watching.